Welcome back to another episode of the Even Your Dynasty show. I hope everybody had a happy Thanksgiving, great time with the family, all that good stuff. Obviously, we only put out one video last week due to the holiday. Now, you guys made it my most viewed video ever on this channel by a large margin. It's up over 4,000 views. I think it's almost doubled up my next highest viewed video from the past. So I appreciate you guys. Maybe I got to rant a little more often. Hope you enjoyed that. But we're going to get back at it. We're going to start having regular content again, and we're going to bring the live shows back this week for sure. Friday. We're working on some other stuff. I don't know when we'll have confirmation or anything and what days those might fall on, but we will keep you guys updated. Today we're going to talk a bit about Corbin Burnes. Mark Feinsand from MLB.com linked him to the Giants, talking about their interest. It makes sense that the Giants are interested in Corbin Burnes. Innings eater. You look at what, Sabian and Evans valued previously. It was a lot of guys that eat up innings. Posey, I would imagine, kind of places a value on that. It's something I value personally as well. I do find that important. It's not the most important thing, but I think it is a very important thing for pitchers or for starters to do, for the overall big picture of winning, especially when you are going to be pretty reliant on your bullpen. You want to have at least a few guys eating up a ton of innings so your bullpen can be at its best throughout the season. So I can understand that. Zach Manassian was in Milwaukee when they drafted Corbin Burnes back in 2016. So there are some links there. And then we're going to talk about kind of the fit overall with San Francisco in the park and everything, and kind of where the short-term impact could be and the long-term. And I'll give kind of my thoughts on, is this somebody worth pursuing and worth handing a, extremely large contract to. So going into 2025, he's going to be going into his age 30 season. MLB Trade Rumors estimates his, contract that he'll receive at about 7 years, $200 million. They're pretty good usually as far as at least average value of the contracts. Obviously, they were a bit off on Snell on the overall deal. They had projected him at 3 for 105. He got 5 for 182. Now, the AAV was only about a $1.4 million difference. And, we could go down the rabbit hole of deferrals, but I'm not really going to go into that. But, they have him at 7 years, Burnes at 7 years, $200 million, which, in my head, I think that's like 28 point something million AAV. I do think after Snell's deal, it's probably pretty safe to bet that Burnes is going to get at least a 30 million AAV. So I would maybe bump that up to 7 for 210. And that would take him from his age 30 through age 36 seasons. So there is some risk there. Now, this is a guy in 2024, 194 innings, 2.92 ERA, 1.1 whip. All that's great. The field independent pitching, for those that like those things, 3.55. So he beat that performance by a little bit. 3.7 WAR. Some things that I think are important for Oracle: 48.8% ground ball percentage, 81st percentile, especially with the way the Giants are talking about building the team around pitching and defense, with Chapman already in place and them looking at guys like Snell or like Ha-Seong Kim. You can tell they're trying to bulk up the infield defense, especially up the middle. So a guy that gets the ball on the ground a lot, that's a good thing. 23.1% strikeout rate. It's only 51st percentile. That's been kind of dropping year after year. But he does a good job of limiting base runners, 6.1% walk rate, which is 80th percentile. And he limits hard contact, 31.6%, which was 95th percentile on the hard hit percentage. So the good, this is a guy that part's really easy. He's just a really good pitcher that has eaten up innings for years. His last 5 years, he's finished top 8 in the Cy Young award race, including winning it in 2021. His ERA over the last 5 years, 2.11, 2.43, 2.94, 3.39, and 2.92. So he had the down year in 2023 where he still, had a sub 3.4 ERA at the end of the year and still struck out 200 hitters. His innings pitched. I'm going to throw out the COVID year in 2020, but his last 4 years, he's thrown 167 innings, 202 innings, 193 and 2/3 innings, 194 or in a third innings his last season. Um, the good limits the walks, as I kind of mentioned, and he also keeps the ball in the yard pretty well. Walks 3.6, 1.8, and this is per 9, 2.3, 3.1, 2.2 over the last 5 years. Home runs per 9, 0.3 and 0.4. That was his Cy Young year. And then he's averaged right on 1 home run per 9 over his last 3 seasons. And his whip year in and year out, pretty, it's always really pretty elite for a starting pitcher. 1.022, 0.94, 0.965, 1.069, 1.096. So that is trending kind of the wrong way the last few years, but it's still really dominant. So a lot of good there. Basically, no matter whatever, what metric or statistic you look as far as season counting stats, Burnes is constantly one of the best pitchers in baseball. So I'm definitely not going to discount that. There is definite value in that. I think with the innings pitched, being as strong as it is, assuming health, I do think he does a better job of, or he would get you closer to the playoffs than a Blake Snell would. Now, my counter to that is I would say Blake Snell I would rather have in a playoff game pitching, because I think at his best, Blake Snell is shown to be possibly the best pitcher in baseball, or like top 2 or 3. I feel like Burnes over a long period of time is going to be the more valuable player. And there's a reason why teams are going to be more willing to give Corbin Burnes a long-term deal. And yes, part of that is age. He's 2 years younger than Blake Snell, or he might actually be like 2.5 years younger than Snell, but he's a couple years younger than Blake Snell. So that's part of it. But, part of it is the reliability. He's been very healthy in his career. You look at his total starts, 32 in 2019. Obviously, he was terrible that year, but then his last 4 full seasons, 28, 33, 32, 32. So he's extremely reliable and extremely durable. Now, that's a lot of mileage on that arm. We'll see if that, sustains over a long-term contract, if that's what he, assuming that's what he gets, and especially if the Giants give it, we're going to be really watching him under a microscope here in San Francisco. But, that has a ton of value, and I think that is more valuable over a 162 game season than what Blake Snell is going to give you. But when you get to the playoffs and it's just a one game, give it your best shot, that's where I think Snell has the added value. And that's why it made sense, really, frankly, for LA. That's why Blake Snell made more sense than Corbin Burnes. So I get why they went that route. And unfortunately, this is where, when I get to the negatives, we're going to kind of have to factor that in for the Giants. Couple, he has some Bay Area connections. He went to St. Mary's. He's from Bakersfield. Obviously, that's not the Bay Area, but he went to St. Mary's for college. So there's reasons to believe that maybe he would be interested in coming back to California, and he might actually be an attainable player for the Giants. Another positive for him, it does make it easier to stomach trading from your young pitching pile. You have tons of young pitching, whether it's Harrison, Birdsong, Wisenhunt, Joe Whitman, Reggie Crawford's probably not, tradable at this time, but Trevor McDonald, Mason Black, Landon Roop. There are a ton of young starting pitchers that are going to be in AA, AAA, or San Francisco going into this season. So it makes it easier to move those guys to try and trade for the bats that you struggle to sign in free agency. So maybe you turn around and you make a trade for a bold trade for a Bo Bichette, or maybe you trade a couple of these guys and try and get a young, controllable bat from another team that maybe lacks pitching. A team like the Reds I've brought up in the past that, yeah, they just made the move for Brady Singer, but they have a ton of young bats. They're pretty thin on pitching in the system. A team like the Cardinals, decent amount of young bats, pretty thin on pitching in the system. So, there are some potential trade partners for the Giants that, and I know there's other teams that I'm leaving out, but there are some potential trade partners for the Giants that they could look to move some of these young arms to try and bring in a young controllable bat, or big time bat that's maybe nearing free agency, then maybe they're interested in trying to, get locked up to a big extension. Now that there's a risk involved in that route, but it does make it easier to make those moves if you have Logan Webb and Corbin Burnes locked up at the top of the rotation. You can stomach that a lot easier. But now getting over to some of the negatives, because there are some. One of the first thing that jumps out is obviously we've noticed his strikeout rate has gone down significantly over the previous handful of years. If you go back to 2020, it was 13.3 strikeouts per nine, then 12.6, 10.8, 9.3, 8.4 this last season in 2024. As I mentioned, he was 51st percentile. Strikeouts are not the be all end all for me, but that is alarming when you notice that it is plummeting year after year. Obviously, his stuff is not quite as dominant. Now, you might go, why is it not as dominant? Is he losing velocity? Is it, what might the case be? And you look, and his average velocity is still what it was pretty much 5 years ago. Like, it hasn't moved much. I've been to look at his cutter, for example. His average velocity in 2021, his Cy Young year, was 95.2. Last season, 95.3. Now, you look at the vertical and horizontal drop. In 2021, it was 18.7 inches of vertical drop, 4.2 inches of glove side horizontal movement. This past season, 17.5 inches of vertical drop and 2.4 inches of glove side movement. So you've seen it's got a little bit bit less horizontal break. And you look at the average, guys hit 237 with a 328 slug on him in 2021. This past season, 251, 362 slug. So it's a little bit less effective, obviously, from that standpoint. But this is the big one that jumps out. In 2021, it had a whiff rate of 33.2% and a put away percentage of 31%. 2024, the whiff rate was only 19%, put away 19.4%. So guys have grown accustomed to his cutter. And some of that looks like he's lost a little bit of his movement, but some of that is it's a pitch that's more prominent around baseball now. So guys aren't, this isn't a unicorn pitch that he's throwing. It's not something that, guys don't see around the game anymore at all. So they don't know what to do with when he throws it. So it's losing some of its effectiveness. And now we're seeing it with his usage. It's going down through at 52.2% in 2021. That actually peaked at 55% one year. Last season, it was down to 45%. So there are some questions when I watch, when I look at all this with Burnes of, is this going to be sustainable over a long period of time? Or are we going to get 1 or 2 good years out of him, maybe 3 or 4, I don't know. And then the last 3 or 4 years of the deal, it's just a disaster. So, I mean, those are legitimate questions that we're going to have to ask with a player like Corbin Burnes on the long term. Now there are some good. The slider, his slider had 35.3 inches, vertical movement, 7.6 horizontal back in 2021, 88 miles per hour. He's actually made it a little sharper. 36.7 inches horizontal, vertical, 8.3 of horizontal. So added some movement on both, still 87.6 miles per hour. Hitters are actually slightly better in 2024 than they were in 2021. But he still has a whiff rate of 46.3%. It's actually a pitch that he probably could bump his usage up, and it would be highly effective, especially against righties. Maybe he starts leaning on that a little more than his cutter. Now, I mean, his cutter has still been super effective as a pitch overall. It's just guys are getting better against it. So it's just something to kind of monitor there. And then I think the biggest negative with Corbin Burnes, and it's no fault of his own, but the biggest negative with Corbin Burnes is for the Giants, because they went over the competitive balance tax, he would cost them their 2nd and their 5th round pick and $1 million in bonus money or international bonus money for their 2026 international signing class, which currently right now they're slated to sign or they have an agreement in place with Luis Hernandez, who from everything I've heard is going to be possibly a top 3 to 5 international prospect that year. Obviously the Giants have the number one guy they have an agreement with in 2025 with Josué Gonzalez. Luis Hernandez is supposed to be a top 3 to 5, and he might be number one again next year. So might that $1 million cost you him? I don't think they do it if they're gonna, if it's gonna cost the guy, but usually it's probably safe. Like it didn't losing $1 million in bonus money didn't impact them getting Gonzalez, and they still are slated to get, I think, like the number 23 or 27 guy, DeGene Macaris from Aruba, on top of Gonzalez. So you can still have a really strong signing class, and it might not impact that top guy, but it does limit your depth on the bottom end of that, which you just never know when you're going to strike gold. Just a reminder to people: Ronald Acuna, $100,000 unranked prospect that the Braves got when they signed him in the international signing period. So just keep that in mind. But you lose $1 million, and more importantly, you're losing a second and a fifth round pick, which I'm very much not a hoard your draft picks kind of person. I think you guys have all figured that out listening to my channel. Like, I am not in that camp. And I'm still pushing to sign a guy like Willy Adames, who I feel is a greater need at shortstop, and a guy that can drive and runs in the middle of your lineup, and someone that can potentially protect Bryce Eldridge down the road. But giving up your draft picks for a pitcher that I have genuine questions on whether or not it actually gets you any closer to beating the Dodgers in a short series. No, I'm not even talking long, regular season. You're not catching them in the next couple of years. But does it actually help you beat them in 2025, 2026, or 2027 when you're assuming Corbin Burnes is going to be at his best and most valuable on the contract in the next 3 years? Does it put you any closer at beating the Dodgers? And I understand there are people out there that have the belief of, well, you just got to get to the playoffs and see what happens. Or, it's a short series, anything can happen. You get there, anything can happen. Well, what does this do for the Giants? Like, where does it put them? I mean, do we think this makes them a 90-win team? Because I don't. I think I feel like realistically, if we're looking at a Corbin Burnes, Ha-Seong Kim offseason, I put them around 85 wins. And maybe if some young guys really take off, maybe you push closer to 90. That's like best case scenario. But even then, when you go to LA, if you have to kind of put them in your head, because you're realistically going to have to go through them. It's like when everyone had to go through the Yankees for all those years. The right people could say, oh, you don't make moves based on the team you might have to face. That's kind of BS. Look at what the Red Sox had to deal with in the early 2000s. They absolutely made moves knowing they were full well they were going to have to try and beat the Yankees in October. And the Giants, you have to take an honest look in the mirror and look at the team in LA and see if you can beat them. And I love Logan Webb and I love Corbin Burnes. I think they're both great pitchers in today's game. But if we're being honest, you go to LA, I mean, forget games 3 or 4 where you're clearly at a disadvantage, but like your best bet against LA is in the shortest series possible. So if you get lucky enough to face them in the division round where it's only 5 games, you're assuming you're going to throw Corbin Burnes, Logan Webb, and whichever in whatever order, and then one of them would get game 5. But you're at a clear disadvantage, like massive disadvantage in games 3 and 4. And do you even have an advantage in games 1, 2, or 5? Because the Dodgers are going to throw Snell in one of those games, and they're probably going to throw either Ohtani or Yamamoto in the other one. And I think it is questionable at best if you even would have an advantage in one of those games. And I mean, we could make a case. I've heard people bring up the 2012 argument. Well, the Tigers had this great team. Well, you know what? The Giants lineup that year was super underrated. You had the MVP in the National League. You had Pablo Sandoval, who was really good. You had Hunter Pence, who was really good. You had great table setters with Pagan and Scudero. Like, they had a really good lineup. The Giants currently, terrible lineup. The Dodgers, MVPs everywhere. Like, you have a worse pen than the Dodgers, a worse lineup than the Dodgers, a worse defense than the Dodgers, and the pitching would be at best a toss-up on the games that you'd be banking on winning. not even the ones where you're just at an enormous disadvantage. So that's where, to me, you, not to go on this tangent, but that's where, to me, you are significantly damaging your, potential going forward in the future. You're going to limit yourself as far as financials go. I mean, the Giants have more money than they know what to do with, so I shouldn't really say they limit themselves financially, but a $30+ million contract at the end of the year on your books is there. And the Giants have not shown a willingness to consistently bump the payroll up to some crazy number. So it is going to impact them. And you know, it, that's there. That's going to limit you. You're taking away draft picks, so it's going to limit your, building for the future. Are you going to then turn around and trade a bunch of pit starters to try and bulk up your offense? That in turn weakens your system further. You know, and at that point, you're basically creating a tight window for yourself to try and win. And you're not going to have the homegrown system to support and supplement what you're doing. You're just making it take longer to rebuild your farm. So for me personally, I don't think Burnes is gonna get you over the hump. And unless you're willing to go Burnes and say screw all the picks and go get Adamas on top of that, and then make a big trade for a bat, and whether it's like a Vladdy Jr. goes super crazy and then sign him to an extension, like you're gonna have to go kind of bonkers to even give yourself like a puncher's chance against the Dodgers in a playoff series. Like that's where I'm at. Is it worth it to shorten your window to try and give you this really long shot chance on going on a run? Or do you just kind of let a guy like Burnes go elsewhere, build from within, understand that it's going to take a couple years, and hopefully when you can swing that door open on your window, you have a great farm. You have young, cheap internal players that you can go to free agency or trade market or whatever to supplement to try and get you over the hump, but you still have a great farm to continue feeding into that. And you can try and swing that door open and try and pull what the Dodgers have done and basically have a 10 to 20 year window where you can just constantly compete, and you're a super attractive destination for free agents and such. So that's personally the route I would go. I love Burnes. I think he's awesome, but I don't personally think this is the time and place to go do this. I understand others that, feel like you should be trying to win every season. I get it. But tell me your guys' thoughts. Like I said earlier, if you do enjoy the content, like the video, subscribe to the channel. I will try and put out updates when I have them for videos later this week. We'll definitely do our live show on Friday. We're going to be doing our last giveaway. We have a Patrick Bailey signed, I think, Bowman prospect card that Ricky's got that we're giving away. So come make sure you check out the channel on Friday for the live show. You'll have to be subscribed to the channel and drop a comment in the live chat to get entered in that. And you're going to have to be around when we do the drawing, which is usually at the tail end of those shows. And then we might possibly have another one this week. If I do get it confirmed, I'll let you guys know. But we're still working on that. But other than that, take it easy. Go Giants. Hopefully we get news soon, and we'll talk to you soon. See ya.